Okay, so we have 144. We saw a baraita yesterday about squeezing fruits on Shabbat, and the baraita said, "Sochatin, pegain, parashin, uzardin." You're allowed to squeeze fruits that aren't usually squeezed for their fruit, but not limonim, not pomegranates. And then we proved it from Bet Menashia, because they used to squeeze sochatin barimonim. So they would normally squeeze pomegranates during the week. They would use it for juice, pomegranate juice. And therefore, this would be like grapes that are usually squeezed, and therefore you can't squeeze them on Shabbat. Okay, so we're going on this Bet Menashia. Who is this Bet Menashia, and why should we care what they did? So basically, we're going to get into the issue of, are these definitions subjective or objective? If there's a few people that squeeze something and consider it like juice, then does everybody have to consider it juice, right? Or does it go by the majority? Does it go by what each person's preference is? Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Amar Rav Nachman, halacha kisher bet Menashia ben bar Menachem. So Nachman says, yes, halacha is like him, and therefore one is not allowed to squeeze the juice. Not allowed to juice pomegranates. That's Rav Nachman. Amar le Rabba Rav Nachman, Menashia ben Menachem tanahu. First of all, who is this person? He's not a tana. He's just some person, some family. So what authority does he have? I guess your point is, you're saying, Rav Nachman, is that we follow the Tana who is quoting Menashia, right? And so we follow Chaz like him. Okay, that's a little better, but still, just because one Tana agrees with him and sees him as an example, does that necessarily mean that halacha follows him? Is he the majority of the world? Right? Why should we, his question, even if there is a Tana that follows him, why should we follow that Tana? Why should we follow some minority practice if most people in the world do not squeeze pomegranates for pomegranate juice? Okay, nowadays it's a popular drink, right? P-O-M, that brand makes pomegranate juice. Okay, so we answer yes, in fact, we follow, even if there's a minority of people that do something, that still gives it a status. And we find this from a different area of halacha and kilayim. Someone leaves weeds in their vineyard, right? Most people cut them out, but let's say someone leaves them. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kidesh, Rabbi Eliezer says they are prohibited because of kilayim. The weeds are a vegetable, and you can't plant those vegetables with grapes. And so even though most people consider them weeds and don't want them there, if you do leave them, that's his opinion. Hachamim disagree, and they say only something that you would grow purposefully, and if it's with the grapes, then that is called kilayim and makes it prohibited. But nobody goes and grows weeds purposefully, and so therefore they're not important, and they would not be prohibited because of kilayim. That's the Mishnah. Why does Rabbi Eliezer in fact think that it's prohibited as kilayim if they're weeds? In Arabia, they like these weeds, these thorns, because they feed them to their camels. And so there you go. Because in Arabia, they like these thorns and they would grow them. Therefore, anyone who has these thorns in their vineyard is prohibited. And so you see, we do follow a minority definition to make something prohibited for everyone. All right, we reject this proof. Hold on, is that really the same? Over there, Arabia is a whole country. Okay, if a whole country thinks something is important, then that makes it important. But here, it's just one individual. Just because he likes pomegranate juice, now no one can squeeze pomegranate juice? So that's not a good proof. So maybe, in fact, follows Rav Nachman there that said halacha is like Menashe, maybe he follows the similar reasoning as Rav Chisda. And Damar Rav Chisda, Teradin shesechatan untanan b'mikveh poslin et hamikveh b'shinui mar'eh. Okay, a little intro to this. In order to make a mikveh, you need water that's from a natural body or rainwater directly, not mayim she'uvim. Once you fill up a pool with rainwater, then you can add other water from a bucket. That's okay, and you can do that forever, and the mikveh will always be kosher. The problem, however, is if you take something that will change the look. If you take a colored, grape juice or something and put it into the mikveh, and it's mayim she'uvim, and it's from a bucket, and if it changes the color, then that makes the mikveh asul. So in other words, just adding water you could add all day long, but not if it changes. Okay, the question we're going to deal with is that water, that liquid that you're adding, does it matter? Does it matter if it's a beverage or not? Some say only if it's a beverage, then it's posel mikveh. Others say any liquid that changes the color will posel the mikveh. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Now, so let's go back here and said beets, that you squeeze them and you put the juice into the mikveh, poslin. If it changes the color and starts looking red, then even though if it's not so much, even just a little bit, that already it doesn't look alike. Why not? Some say it's doraita. More likely it's midrabanan, because now anyone coming and looking says, oh, this is a pool full of juice, and then they're going to think that you can go into juice, and it doesn't have to be rainwater. So that's the reason. Okay. Hold on. Why should this posel mikveh? Beets are not things that are usually squeezed. This is not a beverage, and yet you say it's posel the mikveh. So it must be that because this person did in fact squeeze juice a beet and put it in, that means he considered it liquid, and by doing that, he now it is considered liquid. And so similarly here, if someone considers the pomegranate juice important as liquid, then it's prohibited. Papa אמר, משום דהווה דבר שאין עושים ממנו מקווה לכתחילה. וכל דבר שאין עושים ממנו מקווה לכתחילה, פוסל את המקווה בשינוי מראה. Papa says, no, that doesn't work. Doesn't matter if it's a beverage or not. Anything that you couldn't use to begin with, and if it changes the color, then it's no good. So in other words, it doesn't really matter if you think this is a juice that you would drink or not. Even beet juice, although you would not drink it, it still is posel mikveh because it changes its color. So he in the end rejects this proof of Rav Chisda. But anyway, so that would be what Rav Nachman would be relying on if you follow this interpretation. There has to be a beverage, and so you'd see this person thought that the beet juice was a liquid that was important to him, and so that's an example of subjective reasoning. Okay, Tanan Hatam. Now we're back to mikvaot. Since we mentioned this, we're going to go into mikvaot a little bit, and this machloket about something is it need to be a beverage or any liquid. Nafala tocho yayin or chometz. So wine or vinegar, those are liquids and beverages, and so if some of that fell into a mikveh and changed its color, it would be pasul. And mochal is olive water. It's not oil. During the process of pressing olives, at different stages, some watery substance comes from them that is not oil and is not so important. But yet this mohal, if it goes into the mikveh and changes its color, pasul, the mikveh is pasul. So now we're going to focus on this mochal. Mantana de mochal mashkehu. Who thinks that mochal is in fact a liquid that would make it pasul? Amar Abaye Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya, we have a baraita. Rabbi Yaakov Omer mochal harehu kemashke. Says explicitly it is a liquid. Matam amru mochal hayoseh b'techila tahor lefi she'eno rotzeh b'kiyumo. Side question on Rabbi Yaakov. If in fact it's a liquid, we have another halacha that the mochal at the beginning of the process is tahor. In other words, if something gets wet from it, it doesn't contract tum'ah. It's not considered a beverage. Why should it be tahor if you're saying that it is a beverage? He says the answer is because the owner doesn't want it. It's not a wanted liquid. He would prefer if it didn't come out and it got mixed up with oil. So since it's an unwanted liquid, for the purposes of tuma and tahara, it's considered tahor. However, for the purposes of going into the mikveh and changing its color, it's considered a beverage and would make it pasul. That's his opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, mochal eno mashke. He thinks that this watery substance coming from the olives is not like a liquid. And yet, a side halacha is that if it comes out, the water that comes out from a later stage of the olive pressing is tameh. Well, why is it tameh if it's not a beverage? Because there's some oil that got mixed up there, and because of that oil, which is a liquid and is a beverage, that's why it made it tameh. But otherwise, for the purposes of a mikveh, it's not. Okay, my benayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? After all, they both seem to agree in terms of tumah and tahara, that if it comes out at the very beginning of the process, it's tahor. If it comes out after the olive press, towards the end, it's tameh. So what's the practical difference between them? If it comes after, all the way at the end of a lot of pressing, there would be a difference between them, where Rabbi Yaakov would consider it liquid and cause tumah, and Rabbi Shimon wouldn't. Okay, Rava Amar Mishum Dehave Davar She'eno Sin Himenu Mikveh Uposel Tamikveh B'Shinui Mar'eh. Rava disagrees with this whole line of reasoning, and in other words, before we were saying that something has to be a liquid, has to be a beverage in order to make a mikveh pasul. Rava says, however, that anything that you cannot at the beginning use to make a mikveh, if you put it in later and it changes its color, then it's pasul. So it really doesn't matter whether it's considered a beverage or not, whether it's tameh or tahor. And so this whole, according to him, this whole machloket is not relevant for mikvaot. Okay, now back to our regular subject of squeezing fruits. Amar Rav Nachma Yehuda Amar Shemuel, sochet adam eshkol shel anavim letoch hakedera, aber lo letoch hake'ara. Okay, this is the halacha that we were talking about yesterday, all the way at the end, regarding squeezing on Shabbat. And right, we said not lemons. Lemons you can squeeze. We established that. Thank you. But other things like an orange, right? You can squeeze it into a dish, into the salad directly or something, right? But you can't make orange juice on Shabbat. So why? What is the source? Right here. This is it. Jamal says you can squeeze some grapes into a pot with food in it, but not into an empty bowl. Now, what's the reasoning here? Like, why should it make a difference between this and that? Well, let's go back and think about what's the reason why you can't squeeze in the first place. Seems to be a tolada of threshing. Threshing is you taking the grain out of the chaff, something good out of something bad, separating. And so to here, you want the juice and you don't want the rest of it. So then you're separating the liquid from the solid. However, if you're squeezing it into food, then it's going from solid to solid. It's going from food to food. That's more similar to if you put the grapes in the bowl and just smash them, which would be fine, right? So if it's going from food to food, it's not really separating out of one thing to another. And that seems to be the reason behind this. Okay, so he allows it if you're going into food. So we can learn another halakha because there's another tolada of threshing, which is milking. Milking an animal, you're taking this liquid and that's inside the udder and you're removing it. So you're removing something that you want from something else. It's similar to threshing. And so that is also prohibited on Shabbat. Of course, right. However, if you do it that's only if you do it into an empty bowl. However, if you milk right into a bowl with food in it, maybe right into your cereal, right? Directly, fresh milk, then that would be okay. That'd be the same idea. This is actually a very practical halacha well, if you're a farmer, then and you want to milk the cow, not because you want the milk, but because you want to relieve the cow of the pressure, then you can milk it, but it has to go into a bowl with something else, with solid in it, right? Or go to waste. So you can milk it to relieve. And the same thing is true for a mother. As halacha, mothers don't really like this halacha, right? But also, mother is not allowed to pump into an empty container and to use for the baby later, but she can pump into something with whatever in it, sand in it, in order to relieve her pressure. Okay, so so milking will be the same. So you see, he also agrees that water that comes in, the liquid that comes into food is considered food. Now we have a question on this from the different area of Tumah and Tahara again. Okay, you have a zav, this person is tameh, and anything he touches is tameh. Although, in order for a zav to touch something and make it tameh, it has to be prepared to receive tumah, which means it has to be wet first, right? As we said, in previous classes, only something that is wet first can receive tumah by touching from a zav. So zav is milking this goat. Chalav tameh. Why is the chalav tameh? Iamat mashkeh bala ochalin ochelhu b'mai itkasher. If you say that, see this baraita doesn't say that he's doing it into an empty vessel. It just says anything, and so that sounds like even if he's doing it into food. So you have a zav. He's milking the cow, milking the goat, and the water is going into a pot with food, right? And so that means it's going into food, and it's all considered food, not a liquid. So it was never a liquid. So it doesn't matter if he's touching it. Right? So why is it tameh? Kedamar Rabbi Yochanan betipa meluchlechet al pi hadad, achanameh betipa meluchlechet al pi hadad. It's apparently when they milk the goat, first they put a little drop of milk on the tip of the udder, and that gets it going. And so that is considered a liquid, and that little liquid that he touches is tameh, and that makes everything else it touches tameh as well. Mativ Rabina. Okay, so a similar question from a different angle, not a zav, but someone who's tameh lamet. Someone who's tameh lamet only makes something tameh if it's a kabetza. So here he took a kabetza of zetim v'anavim, but it's exactly, and so that way when he squeezes it out, then the liquid is less than what the original was. So tahor. But if it was more, then you would say tameh, right? But if you say that a liquid that goes into solid is considered solid, and here in this case it didn't say anything about going into an empty pail, so it sounds like even if it's into solid, and yet if it were, there's a lot of ifs, right? If it were more than a kabetza, it would be tameh. But how could it be tameh? It never became wet because that liquid is considered like a solid. Who motiv la v'hu mefarek la? Ravina asked the question, but he answered it himself. This must be a case where he squeezes these fruits into an empty bowl, olives and grapes into an empty bowl, and that's why it's considered tahor. But if you're right, in fact, if you squeeze it into food, then it would be considered food and would never be ready to receive. And we'll stop here. Thank you, everybody.
Saku Baruch.